Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Freddie Sparrow Official. Today I have Ralph Farrow from the Young Politician Company on here to discuss politics and young people in business. Um, I'll let Ralph introduce himself before we go on to the questions.
Well, may I say, Freddie, it's a great honour to be on your channel as the start of the political interview series. So thank you very much for having me on. It is a tremendous honour. So I'll introduce myself briefly to your wonderful audience. My name is Ralph Farrow. I'm the founder of the Young Politician Company. I founded it when I was 18 years old because there was just a huge lack of representation when it came to young people. There wasn't an outlet for youngsters to express their political views. So my personal experience of trying to find a place to write and express my political views sort of started that journey, if you like. So I started the Young Politician website about a year ago, and we've got about over 250 contributors. We get thousands of youngsters every single month that come to our website. Topics ranging from Russia to Iran to Ukraine to the triple lock on pensions and to the winter fuel allowance. I mean, it's just an incredible variety that our contributors bring to our wonderful website. And then we also have the Young Politician podcast as well, where I interview some of the top politicians all across the United Kingdom. We've had the youngest Labour councillor, who unfortunately resigned very recently, Daisy Littmore Creedon. We've had Sir Graham Brady, former chairman of the 1922 committee. We had Graham Downey, Labour MP for Dunfermline and Dollar, on a couple of weeks ago. And I've just released one, funnily enough, with Lord John Redwood, who nearly became Prime Minister in 1995, weirdly enough. So we've got the sort of adaptation to the modern age, the modern information age, in the form of the podcast, and we've also got the websites so people can read what their fellow youngsters are saying.
Thank you, Ralph, for explaining the Young Politician Company. So the first section is young people and politics. So in your opinion, do you think young people are properly represented in current day United Kingdom politics?
Well, whenever I think of representation, I tend to want to make clear to the audience that I'm not in favour of something like quotas, because what I fear with quotas is that we elevate individuals, youngsters particularly, who are not up to the job, who are not ready to take that position, because we feel a sense of pity towards them. I don't think that's the right approach, and it actually disadvantages the people who have competence, who have merit, who have skills, who ought to have that position. So I'm just put on the record, I'm dead set against quotas. But I think what we've got to do is empower youth councils and youth cabinets. I've had a lot of involvement with youth councils and youth cabinets, meeting leaders, understanding what the local issues are around youngsters, and getting a number of contributors actually from those youth cabinets and councils. I think also some responsibility lies with MPs and councillors. I've talked with some councillors, for example, who run sort of councillor shadow schemes. So they get young people from their local area to follow them around in the council and sort of get an idea of what it's like to be a councillor. And some come off that experience saying, this means I don't never want to go into politics, it's such a tough job. And others look at that and go, this is brilliant, I'm helping out in the local community, I'm getting an understanding of what it means to be a councillor, and therefore some of those people are actually considering running for office as well. And then we sort of get it to a national level when it comes to MPs. So I definitely am in favour of greater cooperation between MPs, councillors and youngsters in local areas across this country.
Thank you, Ralph. What issues do you think matter most to our generation, being Gen Z and a bit of Gen Alpha, which are just starting to be able to get into the Instagram and TikTok political side?
So if you look at the polling data, for example, it indicates that personal financial instability is the top concern, alongside cost of living, housing instability, the impact on AI when it comes to the graduate job market. And then, interestingly enough, global affairs and climate change, which we typically associate as being sort of the movements that the young are engaged in, are actually further down the list, which I find quite fascinating. So clearly, it is the job of politicians to address what youngsters are saying in terms of economic concerns, because we have this industrial revolutionary-esque situation when it comes to AI coming in the graduate job market. It's starting to erode some entry-level jobs, but it's also not perhaps having the effect on eroding jobs as we expected, because I don't think people are losing their jobs solely because of AI. They're losing their jobs because of people in that position are using AI and they're becoming AI literate, which I think a lot of young people are getting invested in. So the young people's concerns, according to the polling data, are primarily economic, and I do think politicians need to address that, because otherwise we risk stirring up a sense of bitterness and resentment amongst young people, that there's a disconnect between the political class and what we would like. So the politicians need to do that, I think, for the sake of the country and the health of youngsters all across the country.
Thank you. And how do you think that ties nicely to our next point? How do you think young people feel disconnected from the current political environment?
I think they see, and this is not a position I hold myself, this is a position that many youngsters hold, is that they see politics as largely performative. I think when they watch the House of Commons, they watch politicians, doing various stunts. It could be Zach Polanski, it could be Ed Davey, it could be Andy Burnham, whatever, getting thrown bacon baps off camera or ranking pork scratchings with John Healey. I think youngsters see that as performative and as something that's not taking the issue seriously. So as long as, same with the House of Commons, they watch Prime Minister's questions, there's a lot of shouting, there's a lot of tomfoolery, and I do love that because I'm a political nerd, but other youngsters may not love that because they see that as the uni party, as it has been termed in the media, the idea that politicians are cooperating to sort of have a laugh at our expense and not actually solving the nation's problems. So perhaps, and this is not something I agree with, but perhaps the politicians in our country could drop some of the performative nature of politics and focus on the issues that young people are concerned about, namely personal financial instability, housing instability, the impact of AI, and really sort of relentlessly focus on that. I think that's what, to be fair, Andy Burnham has been doing in recent weeks. His social media activity certainly demonstrates he's got a bunch of young Gen Zers that are around him that are interested in TikTok and Instagram and YouTube Shorts and the like, and they're trying to get that younger demographic involved in politics. And obviously we can have a debate about the merit of the policy there, but it seems encouraging that politicians are jumping on the bandwagon and trying to get youngsters to at least pay attention to their policies and then evaluate whether they're good for the nation or not.
Yes, thank you. And that goes nicely into the next point because of Andy Burnham's TikTok and LinkedIn like videos he's posting, showing what he's doing. How do you think political parties can engage with young people such as myself better? Because starting, I think, next April, if correct me if I'm wrong, there's going to be a social media ban for everyone under 16. So for the 16-year-olds who will be getting onto social media then, how do you think the political parties should engage them?
Sure. So I think the notion that politicians perhaps have peddled in the past, that young people are going to sort of revert back to the ideas of their parents or grandparents, namely go down to the newsagents and grab a newspaper, it's just not going to happen. It's totally unrealistic. So politicians need to go to places where young people are already and are unlikely to leave. So that will be social media at the moment. As you say correctly, a social media ban is impending. So politicians need to navigate that effectively. I'm personally in favour of the social media ban, but they need to find a way to still appeal to young people. I think that goes back to the point I was saying earlier with youth cabinets and councils, perhaps the youth parliament, demonstrating a level of seriousness and engagement with those young people. So it's not just the slick social media videos that Andy Burnham's been producing, it's also actually going out to these young people, talking to them, getting an understanding of the issues that they care about. Because if you don't, then you're just stuck, throwing bacon maps off camera. It's not going to be good enough for young people all across the country. I think also the reason that young people are sort of disengaged and it's causing politicians tremendous amounts of trouble to engage with them is the belief that youngsters hold that perhaps politicians are doing things not only for themselves but to preserve certain elements and certain voting blocks in the country. The most prominent example I would refer to is the triple lock. A lot of youngsters believe, and a fair amount of youngsters actually support triple lock, but a lot of youngsters seem to believe that triple lock on pensions is there not because it's the right thing to do, but because politicians are worried about losing a key voting bloc in the form of the older generation. Now that's most prominent obviously in the Conservative and Reform Party. We have a wide universal agreement on this. Liberal Democrats, Reform, Conservatives and Labour all seem to agree on the triple lock. So perhaps my advice to politicians would be, do the thing that you think is right and necessary, regardless of the political implications, because those are the politicians you can actually put trust in. You can say, okay, perhaps I don't agree with the values and principles, but I admire the fact that you're willing to pursue those values and principles, even in the face of political turmoil. We've seen that with the prominent leaders in the past, people like Tony Blair, Margaret Thatcher, Winston Churchill, people that perhaps did the unpopular thing at the time, but even opponents on the other end of the political spectrum say, I don't agree with what you did, but I agreed with the way that you pursued your principles and values because you are a principled person. I think that's something we ought to respect. So I say to politicians, do what you think is right and necessary, regardless of the political implications, and don't worry too much about preserving parts of the electorate, and obviously engage with youngsters as much as possible rather than just focusing intensely on social media videos.
Thank you. And about social media, do you think it has helped or harmed political discussion because of the way algorithms are? People tend to get obsessed by one topic or the other topic because they're seeing their topic come up a lot after they've watched it once. Do you think that that has helped or harmed their political discussion?
I am incredibly critical of social media. I have been for many years. I don't like social media. It's not an exaggeration to say that without social media, the Young Politician Company wouldn't exist. I'm immensely grateful to what social media has done in terms of propelling our content and getting youngsters engaged. But I do also think that social media has a profoundly negative effect on the minds of youngsters. And I refer to one man, my sort of intellectual hero, so to speak, on this topic, which would be Jonathan Haidt, who wrote a fantastic book called The Anxious Generation recently, written some books called The Coddling of the American Mind in the past as well. He's done some extensive research on the effects of social media, what it's done with anxiety, depression, suicide attempt and suicide rates over the past few years has been utterly damning and despicable. So I do hold social media responsible for that, and if there was an opportunity for me to eradicate social media, I think I would probably do it. So in terms of politicians using social media, again, you've got to be careful because some social media platforms such as TikTok are controlled by the Chinese. They are controlled by foreign powers that are openly intent on destroying the West and undermining our institutions and our systems. So in terms of politicians sort of saying, we need to preserve the West and preserve our values, that sort of counteracts with the idea that you're going to interact with TikTok, because TikTok doesn't want to do those things, and the studies indicate actually that the stuff that they promote is anti-Western, it's pro-Chinese, it's a way in which they can get under the skin of the West and therefore sow discontent within Western nations and cause trouble. So I would say to politicians, I think there's some such as Tom Tugendhat who just refuses to go on TikTok because of moral concerns. I'm one of those people, I don't go on TikTok for those reasons. But I would say to politicians, do the principled thing, which is say, actually, I'm not going to engage with social media platforms like TikTok, because actually what they do is try and undermine our society, and I don't want to engage with a platform like that. As for the other ones, we need to be incredibly aware of the effect that social media has on young people, and I was disappointed at the time that Sir Keir Starmer, who obviously our former Prime Minister, ancient history at this point, took so long to actually make a decision on the social media ban. He said, we're going to go for a review, we're going to get a consultation of all the parents. It's like, well, other parties have been calling for this for months and years. Why don't you just do it? You know the evidence. It's straight in front of you. Prominent intellectual forces have been saying this for years. So why don't you take action? Why do you need a consultation and a review for just God knows how long, trying to understand this issue when in fact you know it's there? And then eventually it came to that viewpoint, and it's going to be coming in very shortly. So again, it goes back to the principle, the values nature of politics, and people actually need to say, I'm going to make a stand. It might cost me electorally, but so be it. I'm going to stick with my principles and values. I'm not going to concede to these social media companies, particularly the ones that are controlled by foreign powers.
Thank you for your points. So, the first question about the young people and business is, how difficult is it to start a business while you're young?
I think it sort of depends on what the business is about. So for me, in politics, I've had an intense interest in politics for many, many years at this point. So starting a business about politics was almost sort of my nerdy dream come true, because it's something that I thought of for years. I wanted to run my own venture. I didn't like the idea of pursuing the educational route, which has been pushed by teachers and by the government for many, many years. So I was always keen on the idea of running my own company. And with the Young Politician Company, it presented me with a brilliant opportunity, because I looked at the current situation when it came to outlets and young people, the relationship between young people's viewpoints and whether that could be expressed properly in an outlet. And I thought, this is hugely unfair. Why isn't anyone doing anything about this? And I could have taken the option of going to university and sitting on the sidelines and saying, actually, there's nothing I can do. Hopefully somebody in the next few years is going to solve the problem for me. And in fact, that's a terrible way to approach life. What you've got to do is seize the opportunity, seize the situation, make the decision yourself, start your own company, because if you don't take the opportunities, you can't just wait and hope somebody gives it to you. You just make the opportunity yourself, do the thing, pursue your passion, because otherwise you'll just be working in perhaps a dead-end job for countless years, and you won't be achieving the things that you want to achieve. And we've only got one life on this side of eternity, so we've got to live it as much as we possibly can. So all of those all of those visions, so to speak, informed my decision to form a company and sort of overrode many of the concerns, because you may think, you need some money to start a company, you need an idea, you need people around you, you need courage, you need guts. Sure, you need all of those things, perhaps not in greater quantity than you imagine, but you do need those things. And it does make it an awful lot easier if you have a passion about the subject. If I was going to start a company in textiles, textiles isn't my thing, despite being impeccably well dressed, as you would have noticed, Freddie. But textiles isn't exactly my thing. So sitting behind a sewing machine and designing things, that would be my idea of hell. But I know somebody who just loves that. She's got her own business about textiles, and she just does it anyway because that's her passion. So I would say to those young people who are on the verge of doing that or have the dream, go for the dream. Go for the dream. Don't let it wither away. Don't let it die, because this is your life. You live your life. Take the dream, take the opportunity. Otherwise, it's just going to go away and you'll live an unfulfilled life for the rest of the time.
Thank you, Ralph. I personally am trying to do that because I saw a gap in the market with 3D Essentials, which is my 3D printing brand where I can make logos for businesses for their marketing. And I thought, I'm going to do that. I'm just going to not let anyone stop me, because several people I know in WhatsApp and stuff have said, oh, I don't think you should be doing it, you're too young. And for me, that's basically telling me, I challenge you to make a company. Because it's sort of challenging me to do it. And going on to the next question about young founders struggling to be taken seriously, I would definitely say that for me, experiencing it as my own age, I have experienced some of that because of me not being 18 yet. Being a year and a couple of months off being 18 stops me from being able to do certain contracts I would like to do and register a limited company. But it does mean that I have now a backlog of all my previous work and YouTube evidence for when I'm 18, so I'm not starting from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. No, good on you. We need more people like you, Freddie, who are just taking risks, because in the country now, we have a government that's fundamentally anti-risk and doesn't want people to take risk. And starting your own business is a risk, but it can have a huge reward. Even if it doesn't work out, you'll learn a hell of a lot of things. You'll learn more things in starting your own business that perhaps doesn't work than you will sitting in the classroom. So good on you.
Thank you. Do you think some young founders struggle to be taken seriously as well?
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. I'm sure it depends on the industry. Some industries perhaps are more unsettled by the thought of a young founder, others not. Again, I would say to young people, who cares? Who cares if people are doubting you because of your age? It's completely irrelevant. And if you get people that are saying, like that guy in, he's a reform council leader, I can't remember the place, maybe Northamptonshire or something like that, and he's gotten a number of nasty comments about his age. It's like, it's just juvenile, it's really pathetic. Don't go after him because of his age. If you want to attack what he's doing, attack the policies, have an intellectual discussion about what he's doing. Don't say, oh, he's 19 years old, therefore he's completely utterly useless and an idiot and all that type of stuff. It drags down political debate. It's a waste of your time. Please don't do that. And for the young people that perhaps are facing the obstacles, again, I like talking in specifics rather than generalities. So if young people can point out an obstacle, I'm perfectly happy to work with them to stop that obstacle existing. But if that obstacle does exist for a number of young people who are starting their own business, then I would say to them, it's down to you to try and overcome that. You are responsible for the decisions that you make in your life. So if it's your company, you do your own thing and don't let anyone drag you down, because if they do drag you down, then who wins? You don't win. It's the guy that drags you down who wins. So keep pursuing your dream, keep relentlessly going for what you want, because at some time you will get it, and even if you don't get it, you'll learn an awful lot on the way, and that's the journey that you've got to go on. So absolutely go for it. Don't let anyone stop you, and keep up the dream.
Thank you. And do you think the government gives enough support for young entrepreneurs? Because I'm aware of something called the King's Trust, I believe, which helps people 18 to 24. But I don't think there's anything for 16, 17-year-olds. And I think that the government may offer grants or something to help young people succeed doing businesses.
Yeah, I'm not particularly in favour of subsidies or grants or anything like that, or government interventionism on that type of scale. I think the government can do a number of things to get out of the way. The number one thing they need to do is get out of the way, weirdly enough, because many of the regulations, many of the taxation systems that they've set up have actually strangled business. And we had, obviously, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, obviously the Prime Minister and the Chancellor in July 2024, come in and say that growth was the number one priority. And everyone thought, okay, growth. What does this mean? Growth. And when you talk to people who are on the Labour end of the political spectrum, and I've done that on the Unpolitician podcast, so forgive me for the shameless plug, but go and watch my interviews with Labour MPs. And once you get into their mind, you start to understand socialism and why they believe in socialism and why they believe in bigger government. So Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer saying they want growth and then doing the things that sort of most people would understand to be fundamentally anti-growth is hardly a surprise, because the people that I've talked to on the Labour end, that they just don't believe in the things that cause growth, because they believe in bigger state, more intervention, more benefits, more regulation, more taxation. So if Andy Burnham and his cronies at top of government want to help young founders and businesses all across the country, the message is simple: get out of the way. And it reminds me of that great Ronald Reagan quote when he said that the government's view of the economy can be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it continues to move, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidise it. And that is the Labour Party's proposal for the economy in a nutshell. President Reagan was right then, and President Reagan is right now. So Andy Burnham, get your government out of the way of economic affairs. Allow young people and businesses all across the country that have struggled tremendously, lost over 100,000 jobs since the Rachel Reeves budget in November of 2024. We like to focus at the Unpolitician on hospitality, because hospitality have been bearing the brunt of that for a long period of time. It's a huge failing of the government to do that. So they ought to get out of the way, deregulate, cut taxes, cut the benefits bill, and sort of shrink government back to a responsible size and do the things that government are actually meant to do, rather than encroaching on the rest of the people's freedoms. So Andy Burnham, in the nicest possible way, get the government out of the way and free the wing-clipped birds of the economy.
Thank you. And what should the government do to make businesses easier, to reduce the barriers which are quite big for people starting 16 or 17 years old?
Well, I may walk into a bit of praise for the Prime Minister Andy Burnham at this point, which is rare for me, but I may do it. He said that he was intent on repealing the 50% target set by the Blairite administration back in the late 1990s for people to go to university. Now, that was a terrible idea at the time, and it remains a terrible idea now, because what it meant was that teachers, that schools were incentivized to send young people who perhaps didn't want to go to university, or would have been better down the apprenticeship or starting their own business or getting a job route, were then forced into university. So they were saddled with, at the moment, £53,000 worth of debt is the average debt for a university graduate. Now we have over 700,000 graduates on benefits, the highest youth unemployment rate in over 11 years. That was the consequence of the Blairite agenda, forcing those young people against their will into university, when in fact they would have been better in different routes. So I do praise what the Prime Minister is doing on rolling that back and putting the emphasis on T-levels, on bricklayers, electricians, decorators, all of those jobs that people who perhaps 25 years ago were forced to go into university would love to do now. And that's absolutely brilliant. We should be encouraging that. And actually, through those professions, those people start businesses as well. I know young people in my experience who've gone into those things and they're starting their own business now. They're employing people. That's how you create growth in the economy. You allow these people to do their thing. They will employ people. They will pay their wages. And those individuals as well will expand their businesses if they get the opportunity. They'll pay tax. The government gets more tax revenue. It's sort of economics 101, and perhaps Andy Burnham and co should attend that lesson. But in terms of sort of university and that type of thing, I do believe that the university system is in a huge pickle at the moment. And I don't think there's any intention from the Education Secretary, Lucy Powell, when she's not, slagging off grooming gang survivors, on trying to fix that situation, because it's a thorny issue. We have the Plan 2 student loans and the £53,000 worth of debt the youngsters are getting in. So they've got to figure out a way to do that. But I think the encouraging first step is saying, Tony Blair got it wrong in the late 1990s when he said 50% of youngsters should go to university, and we need to encourage more youngsters to do bricklaying and T-levels and the like. But I suppose the counterpoint to that, if I'm going to be balanced and fair, is to say that that could be the soft bigotry of low expectations. If some teachers misapply that standard, I suppose, and say to somebody, you're more fit to go into T-levels and apprenticeships and bricklaying and the like, but you're not really fit to go into university. And perhaps that's a misallocation of what the Prime Minister is saying. So I do understand those warnings from opposition parties. I think the Conservative Party said that was a warning. I totally get that. I completely understand that. I think there's a fine line for the Prime Minister and his Education Secretary to walk in order to make it clear, look, we want people to go into apprenticeships, we want people to do T-levels. There should be equality between T-levels and A-levels. But we're also saying, teachers don't encourage people who want to go to university to go to T-levels, because it's not what I want to do. It's not fair to force people who want to do T-levels to go to university. Why is it fair to force people who want to go to university to do T-levels? It's switching the other way around, and it's not fair on them. So the government have got to be careful. I do encourage them to go further when it comes to Andy Burnham's recent announcements on education.
Thank you. I myself am doing a T-level in digital software development, and it's amazing because of the practical elements and industry placement.
Absolutely.
And the barriers, I would say, if you would agree, is probably regulation and no clear path to follow to go into a business, because it seems for me that people get told, oh, you need a job, oh, you need 10 years of experience, you need a university degree. It doesn't feel very set out to younger people.
Yeah, absolutely right. I remember, sorry to chip in, but I remember when I was back in school sort of pressing some of the teachers, trying to get an understanding of why they were pushing university, why they were saying you must go down the education route. I remember there was one time I was sitting in my maths class and a group of my friends sort of asked the teacher, because we were learning about circle theorems, and we asked the teacher, what is the use for this in the world outside of school? How are we going to use this? I remember the teacher said, we need this for the exam. We said, right, but that's not outside work. He said, well, you need it for the exam, and then you pass the exam, you do your A-levels, and then you do your A-levels, you go to university, and you get out of university and you get a job. And after that, you start family. It was like he was programmed in a robotic sense to just say the things over and over again. So then you try and ask him a question, like ChatGPT, it just gives you the most random answer. And you think, what on earth are you talking about? Just give me a human answer as to why that's the case. And I think, unfortunately, so many of the teachers who perhaps haven't taken the risk that you and I have taken in starting a business don't understand the situation. So they just take what their parents or grandparents taught them about. You've got to go to school, you've got to get to university, you've got to get a job, you've got to get a salary job, can't take out a loan, start a business, because God forbid that's too risky. You just got to follow the path, and then you just retire based on state pension, and then you just perish. I mean, it's not a particularly nice situation. So unfortunately, many of the teachers have fallen into that trap. And I do feel sorry for the young people who are trapped in school who don't get that encouragement. It is a great shame. There's untapped potential that needs to be tapped there.
Yep. And yeah, now we'll be going on to this section about talking about Ralph's company, The Young Politician. And if you want to check them out on Instagram, I'll put the website up on the screen now with a QR code to go to it now. If you wanted to watch it or go to it, and also be in the description and the pinned comment. And yeah, Ralph, why did you get involved with Young Politician?
Well, I started The Young Politician aged 18. And it was about this time last year, actually. I was sitting at a desk similar to the one that I am at now. And I was, armed with a pen, and there was paper on the desk. And I was actually calculating how much it would cost for the travel expenses to go to university. And I was figuring out the numbers. And I was thinking, geez Christ, this is a lot of thousands of pounds I had to go to travel, because I was planning on staying at home and commuting rather than taking out the additional debt of staying in student accommodation. Then I was adding that alongside the £9,200 I was going to pay every single year. And I was just mind-boggling, inconceivable levels of debt that I was going to take to go to university. And as I was writing that stuff down and calculating it, I had a rogue thought in my mind that for many years I sort of been nurturing but placing firmly in the back of my mind, which had been, why don't you start an outlet for young people to express their political views? Because in the past I'd emailed, I'd contacted a number of publications all across the country to try and get my work published, and thankfully, to the good people of Conservative Home and Times newspaper, I was able to get my stuff published. But it was a tough journey for one to go on during that situation, because you're competing against the titans of political commentary, and as a 17-year-old or 18-year-old youngster as I was at the time, that's a difficult thing to do. I just couldn't find during that search a place for young people to express their political views that was almost solely dedicated to young people. I thought, that's awful. Why is that not the case? So for years I had that perspective, and then whilst I was calculating the university costs, it just came in my mind. And I just grabbed onto it, and from that point on, I just did the necessary things to start the business. I I talked to the guests, and at the beginning, as I do now, I did virtually everything. So the website stuff, getting the contributors, getting the guests, editing the videos, doing the short clips online, uploading the articles, analyzing them, editing them, all that stuff I did myself, because when you're starting your own company, nobody's there to save you. I mean, it's just down to you. You're going to do the stuff, and if you take a day off, it's not like the public sector. I mean, if you take a day off, nobody's going to do the work for you, because you're the one that's doing, unless you've got employees, unless you're in that position of growth, nobody's going to help you do it. So it was solely down to me at that point. And I was doing the work, I was getting understanding. It started to get a following. We started to get hundreds of thousands of views on social media. We started to get thousands of people every month coming to the Young Politician website. People getting in touch, from the university saying, "Can I work for you? Can I do work experience?" And I'm just sort of thinking, whilst I'm sitting in my lounge, now how could this happen? Months ago, this guy who's at Oxford University, for example, I have one today from Oxford University, who said, "Can I work for you?" And I think, hang on. 6 months ago, I was in sixth form. I'm not in university. You're one of the most prestigious universities in the world, and you're saying to some nobody, which is me, "Can I work for your company? Can I write for you?" It's maddening stuff. So that's the pleasure of running your own company. Again, you're on your own. You're on your own schedule. You're on your own sort of idea of what you want to do. There's nobody to answer to, because you are your own boss. You could argue that the customers and the contributors are the boss, but at the end of the day, you're the boss. And all of that stuff is a tremendous motivating factor. And also, I get to talk to people like Sir Graham Brady and Simon Hart and Graham Downey and Isabel McQueen, Sam Smith, Ian Dale, and people watching this may be going, "Ralph, what the hell have you been smoking? Have you been adhering to the Green Party's drugs policy?" But what I say to them is, for a political nerd who for many years has spent time reading these people's books, to actually talk to them in a forum similar to this, it's a bit surreal, because it's not Newsnight, it's not Sky News interview. I'm asking the questions. I'm saying to the person who's done this, a life experience in politics, what was it like during that time? You sat in the room when Liz Truss said to you that she was going to resign. Whilst we were watching it on the news, you were the guy who was being told by Liz Truss that she was going to resign. I mean, that is incredible for someone like me to get in contact with someone like that who's willing to come on and talk with that stuff. And that got a positive audience reception, which is always lovely. So it is a huge honour to do the job that I do now, because I truly love it. I absolutely love editing the Young Politician website. I love hosting the podcast. I love doing the stupid little clips, despite how juvenile they may seem at the time. I do very much enjoy doing all of that. And for young people out there thinking of starting their own business in their own niche area, this is what you could have. You could have the huge enjoyment. Yes, there's going to be tough spots. Yes, there's going to be difficulties. Things are going to go wrong. In my case, guests are going to not turn up on time. They're not going to agree to come on. They're going to be grumpy. Contributors may withdraw articles. You're going to get difficulties, but you're going to get difficulties in life. This is life. Just adopt the responsibility of starting your own company, and through that responsibility, you will find meaning. You will find that every single morning you're waking up and you're thinking, "I absolutely love what I do. I'm raring to get to the desk to do whatever my job requires, just because I love it." So if young people out there, go for it. Go for the thing that you love, and don't be held back by anything.
Thank you. And what are you trying to achieve with the Young Politician, and what have you learned from speaking to young people about politics?
Well, what I set out to achieve when I started the Young Politician was to give young people all across the country representation, political representation that youngsters had been starved of for many years at that point. It was just perhaps a personal grudge that I wanted to solve, my own personal experience that told me that it was difficult to do that. So I wanted to solve that problem for young people who perhaps were in my shoes, the shoes I was in a couple of years ago, trying to find an outlet. And now, people get in touch with the email addresses, they contact me on LinkedIn and say, "We really appreciate what you've done." Because through that, I've been able to publish an article about, tribes in Russia, or, what's happening with the Ukrainian oil pipeline, or something like that. Niche topics that perhaps the Spectator or the Guardian or something like that wouldn't publish because it wouldn't appeal to their readership. But we take pretty much any topic. So people coming to me and they feel enlightened, they feel free by the fact that they can actually do that. So I've learned an awful lot from the contributors, actually. That's what I found. because we're a free speech outlet, I publish articles from all across the political spectrum. Many times I've read articles and think, I strongly disagree with this, but because we're a free speech outlet, we publish articles from all across the political spectrum, not discriminating because you're on the left or the right or the centre. It doesn't matter, because it's for young people expressing their views. It's not my place to say, actually, no, you're wrong. I'm not going to publish it. I'm not going to censor you. I'm perfectly happy to give you my views if you ask me, but I'm not going to override you because we're a free speech outlet. So I learned an awful lot in terms of political perspectives and how people articulate their thoughts, and on topics that perhaps didn't get much coverage. I've learned from contributors, and also the resilience and the kindness of some of those people who have reached out generally because they've been struggling with this for the past few years. And in terms of the future, I see it expanding from this point. Our ambition is to get more than thousands of people, 10,000, 20, 30,000. Why not? Why not aim for the sky? Obviously, it's got to be, realistic. I'm not saying tomorrow we're going to get, 1 billion people every single month. It's not going to happen, because if you set the aims too high, you're going to feel like a failure because you won't have met them. But if you set them at a realistic height and say, I want to get 5,000, 10,000 within the next year or so, that's perfectly realistic. And from that point on, I'll get more opportunities to spread the word on podcasts like the one here, which I'm intensely grateful for. And then from that point on, people will start to hear about it, start to hear about my name, the company, and they'll start to engage. And I'll be hugely honoured to see that go through. And obviously, a big thanks goes to contributors who have done their own work in spreading that, and the guests as well, who have been gracious in spreading the word to hundreds of thousands of followers, in some cases on social media, which has got the word out and got people to engage with our project. So again, I think it is a shared responsibility, I suppose, between the contributors, guests, and myself. But then again, it's a huge honour to do something like this, and I'm not taking anything for granted. And I'll do everything in my power to make sure that we can get out there and spread the word.
Thank you. Now, current politics section. This section is all over the news over the last few weeks, and this section will get outdated very quickly because it will get
we have a new Prime Minister by the time this goes out, Freddie.
Probably mid-September, maybe.
Yeah, give it a few months. Yeah.
So, what political story matters most to young people right now?
Are you referring to a personal political story from somebody in our current political scene?
Like one which you hear most young people talk about, come to you to talk about.
People always take inspiration from people that have done the hard work and are young and have got into positions of power. There was that man I mentioned earlier, George Finch, who's a reform council leader, actually, at an incredibly young age. We had on the first episode of the Young Politician podcast, Daisy Blakemore Creedon, who was the youngest Labour councillor elected a number of years ago. I think it was in May 2024 that she was elected, and she made the big headlines at the time because I think she was 19 years old, something around there, and she was a Labour councillor in Peterborough. And the reason I want to talk to those people, and Sam Smith, who was the youngest county council leader in the country, of Nottinghamshire County Council, I believe, the reason that we talk to people like that is to understand why they went for that job, because they could have done the thing that perhaps I did, be on the commentary sidelines, give my views when I'm prompted and edit a website and host a podcast. But they thought actually it was worth their time to get involved in frontline politics. And as we know, frontline politics is a really brutal business. You're going to get horrible messages. You're going to get people that viscerally disagree with you, and constant political attacks, and also personal attacks mixed in there as well, which is always unpleasant for whichever candidate of whichever party. So I like to put that to people like that and say, why did you do that? And the most common answer, I think, which is where young people can resonate, is, things in my local area weren't going well. I felt passionate about the local youth centre, or I felt passionate about the fact that businesses in my area were too highly taxed. People were getting let go. There was poverty in my area. All across the political spectrum, there seems to be a sort of united front that actually people are motivated by the same things fundamentally, but they see the solutions to be different. So if you, for example, like I have to interview a Labour councillor, Daisy Blakemore Creedon, she was concerned about poverty, she was concerned about deprivation in her area, and she said that the reason to do that, the reason to help those people, is actually to get government more involved and give more benefits, get people on welfare. And when you talk to someone like Paul Holmes, Conservative MP for Hamble Valley, he grew up on a council estate, he saw a lot of people in poverty, and he actually saw the way to get those people out of poverty, to get them off benefits and into work. So it's a different political philosophy. So I find actually quite disgusting when people say to opposing politicians, you clearly don't care enough about those people, or you want them to die, or you want them to suffer. It's a really, really reprehensible argument, I would say, because I think the people in politics are motivated by the same thing, to help their constituents, to help people of the country. They just see different ways of doing it, and let's have a rational, perhaps heated and confrontational debate about those issues, rather than resorting to attacking the motivations, unless there is actually evidence that the motivations are ill-formed. So I think young people do resonate with stories that they can put themselves in, namely Daisy Whitmore, Creed, and Sam Smith, and all those types of people. And that's why we try and find those people. I've been trying to find some in the States, actually, some of the youngest Congress men and women over there who have become congressmen and women because of, again, the same concerns that we have on this side of the pond as well. So I do think it is important to relate young people's concerns and young people themselves who have gone out there and made a difference.
Thank you. And is there any current issue politicians are getting wrong? If you could choose one issue out of all the issues that you would want politicians to look at again today or in the next parliamentary session, what would it be?
It's a hell of a question. I probably would say demographical change. That's the demographical change. It's going to sound weird. Or the threat from bioweapons. That's one hell of a mix. So on demographical changes, I don't think politicians are discussing enough the fact that the amount of children per woman is going down drastically, and has been doing for the past few decades. So the consequence of that, logically, is politicians saying we're not going to do a Hungary style sort of inspiration for women to have children by incentivizing them through the tax system and having a socially conservative government that's going to emphasize that in all levels of institutions. What they've actually done is reach for the immigration lever, and ever since 1997 had mass legal migration to come to this country to sort of fill in the populational gap, so to speak, because people born in this country aren't having children as much, so therefore they're going to immigrants, many immigrants from sort of third world countries, so to speak, who have a higher reproduction rate. So therefore those individuals are reproducing more, and therefore the sort of tax amount, so to speak, of young people supporting pensioners, I think it used to be 7-1 back in the 1970s, now it's 3-1, 3 workers for every pensioner. So therefore the pyramid, it's getting increasingly strained, because fewer and fewer young people are supporting more and more old people who are going to be living longer and drawing off the state pension and are going to be receiving more benefits. And obviously we have Andy Burnham talking about social care as well. It's going to increase taxes for that. The old people aren't going to be paying the bulk of the taxes for that. It's going to be the wealthy people who are fleeing under socialist Britain, and it's also going to be the young people as well who are in work, who are healthy and not on benefits, so they're going to be paying for those old people. So that would be the first one. The second one will be bioweapons, which is, it's a transition from demographic change, but with the bioweapons, I do fear greatly the effect that has if that falls into the hands of a malevolent foreign power or a terrorist. The way that can be deployed, the pathogenic nature of that spread, that it can be put in sort of unidentified spaces, and it would take months and months of the best scientists, as we saw during COVID, to even come up with a method to actually combat this and help the population. Obviously, remember during the COVID time, it took months and months and months, incredibly short amount of time, but not when you're in it, incredible, months and months and months and months to find a vaccine that therefore helped the population. So I do fear it falls in the wrong hands. We saw with COVID, obviously, it was dismissed to begin with as a lab leak. It was said it was going to come from a bat in a sort of Wuhan market, so to speak, and then we realized actually it did come from a lab, and perhaps the Chinese were developing a bioweapon. So the thought of that, I think, for politicians would keep them up at night, because that is something that, regardless of the domestic and foreign policy agenda that you have, that will throw everything away. And when I discussed with Lord Simon Hart, who was the Wales secretary in the Boris Johnson government, he said to me during COVID, whilst he was sitting around the table, it just hit him at one point where he said, all the priorities we had in 2019, getting Brexit done, levelling up, all that type of stuff, thrown by the wayside, because we've got COVID, we've got this pathogen, we've got this awful disease that's coming in that just shuts everything down, and the priorities are just thrown directly in the bin. So that's the stuff that keeps me up at night, alongside the demographic change. So politicians ought to get that up the top of the agenda and talking about it and dealing with that appropriately.
Thank you. And for ending stuff, what one change, if you were Prime Minister tomorrow, you can make a decision on anything which will affect young people, and it will be approved instantly, what would the change be?
Am I dictator for that one day? Is this how it
Yes,
works? Oh
pretty
God,
much.
the joys, the joys. Um, oh God, if I could do one thing, crikey, uh, what would I do? Perhaps I should have prepared. There are so many different areas of policy I'd love to attack. Affect young people. Perhaps abolish stamp duty. Maybe that would be the first thing that I do. Help youngsters on the housing ladder. Maybe right now, compel all the nations who have foreign nationals in our jails to take them back. If I had a wand that I could cast spells on these nations. I mean, there are so many things. I'd just love to be prime minister, provided that everyone would just forget what I would do. So, if I did a really shoddy job at being prime minister, then I would say to these mythical gods, eliminate that. It didn't happen. Pretend that now I just go back to live my regular life. But if it did happen, I can be hailed as a hero. Somebody who changed the fabric of Britain or something. But unfortunately, I'm not a member of Parliament. I'm not a member of the Labour Party, so I'm not going to be prime minister anytime soon. But perhaps scrapping stamp duty is the one that comes to mind. But I'm sure in the next few days something will come into my mind, and I'll think, God, I should have picked that.
And last one, what advice would you give to a young person, 16 and older, starting a business or getting involved in politics?
Surround yourself with good people. Surround yourself with people that support you. Because there's nothing worse than surrounding yourself with individuals who want to drag you down. Because then, if you adopt that mentality, they don't just become a tool of them and their minds. You're not living your life, you're just living their life through you. It's a pointless waste of your life. Don't do that. I think it's been titled by some as the PI people. It's a phrase that I've heard many times. It's a great phrase. The problem is people. People around you constantly saying the problem is this, the problem is this, the problem is this. Think, how are you going to solve that? There are almost 3Ds to sort of complete that. But the PI people that are constantly surrounding you, they're saying, this is the problem, right? What's the solution? Don't know. It's completely worthless. You've got to have somebody there that's ruthlessly, relentlessly determined to find a solution, because otherwise you'll be constantly trapped in this idea that you're a victim of the world, and because you're a victim, you can't really do anything, and then you just hope somebody else will do something for you, and everything's out of your hand. It's a brilliant way to abdicate responsibility, because somebody else can do it. God forbid I do anything about it. I could have done it in my situation. Somebody else will find out that doesn't bother me out. Get on with my regular life. But that's no way to live your life in a productive manner. So you've got to surround yourself with people who have the same passion for the project. And if you do encounter the PI people, then say to them, I'm not going to tolerate this. I've just cut you out because you are corrupting the project. You are constantly intent on dragging me down, and they will drag you down with them if you're not careful. And then I would also say to those young people, if you're worried about the risk of this, if you're saying, I need money, I need experience, it might not work. Sure. There's no point in lying. It might not work. It might fail. The young politician might fail. I'm perfectly aware of that. But what's the point in having the dream if you're not going to follow it? Because then it's just going to die. And what's worse than a dream that has died? It's something that's completely unworthy of your attention. You've got to accept the fact that you will take risks in business. Things will go wrong. Things will go right. You'll be blessed. You'll be cursed. Just pursue your dream. Because your dream may be taken by somebody else, and the unique selling point, so to speak, may be robbed by other people, and therefore the opportunity has slipped away from you. So go for what your dream is. Perhaps I've said that many times on this podcast, but go for your dream and pursue it, and make sure that nothing gets in your way. Don't get dragged down by people, and you're almost obsessively focused on it. Because if you become too distracted by your dream, too distracted by other things outside of your dream, and then perhaps the dream starts to go away, and therefore you don't actually achieve the outcome that is desired. So please, for the young people out there that are undecided and want to start their business, just do it. Just take the risk and accept what comes, and you will learn a lot, whether it succeeds or fails. And I do hope that you are blessed by the Lord to have your business be successful.
Thank you. Everyone watching, please check out his socials available here. And if you want Ralph back on the channel to discuss more questions, leave the questions down below. And everyone, please like and subscribe to his channel as well, which will be cleverly posted from.